Hello, hello, and welcome to this edition of the Law Firm Blueprint. I'm one of your hosts, Jay Ruane, and with me, as always, is my man, Seth Price, down there. Let's talk a little bit more about the Fisher Mastermind, because there's a lot of people who don't really know what a mastermind is in this context. So why don't you explain it for us so that people in the audience who haven't heard of it know what they'd be getting into if they showed up at a John Fisher Mastermind?
So look, this is something he created about 12 years ago in Chicago. The masterminds, there's this process where you sit around with some people that are also bright. You focus group your issue. They've morphed into different types of masterminds. This particular one, there's usually one or two outside speakers with some sort of interesting angle. There's very often updates. Michael McCree very often talks on AI. I talk about what's new in search. Everyone brings their expertise to the table. But the magic happens when we sit around in a room and everybody raises the biggest issue facing their firm. And as a group, we try not to tell them what to do, but extract what's there and give perspective based on things we've done. And what's interesting at having done this over the last 12 years is that all of our issues come into different categories, right? Whether it's operations, marketing, hiring and firing, the legal production, each of these things. And that as you do it, a couple things happen. You realize you're not alone, and you realize that the people have been there. That what you think is like nobody else has dealt with before is generally things that other people have struggled with. You don't always walk away with a bulletproof answer, but you're going to come by with sort of like, hey, this is a one-off. Maybe you shouldn't be focused on that versus, hey, I've been there, done that, and greatest example that I see all the time is the struggle with the non-lawyer ops person, starting with an office manager to an ops manager to a director of operation, with a continuum up to COO. And I think lawyers really struggle with how to, and I know when I went back, I did not, partially because I was that person without the caseload, but that figuring out how to slot that in sooner than later, I think is what starts to run your firm as a business, not as a law firm. And that is what I see most people, their entry level issue revolves around that.
Yeah, well, I think a lot of people, are reticent to bring somebody on because they know the salary requirements for that are going to be on the higher end compared to a frontline receptionist or even an associate. Because if you have somebody doing operations, it's a bigger thing, and they're not necessarily ready and willing to give up that amount of revenue, even though it would buy you freedom to generate more revenue or live the life that you want. I think there's this pull that, like, well, if it's my firm, I should be doing it. I think there's a little bit of therapy that goes on in these mastermind groups. I certainly saw it when I saw you in DC with Charlie Mann's group, which was phenomenal. One of the things that happened, I piped up at one point in Charlie's group, and I looked at the lawyer who was on the hot seat, and I was just like, well, whose law firm is it? Because the bookkeeper was pushing back about using QuickBooks server-based or QuickBooks Online, and the lawyer wanted QuickBooks Online, and the bookkeeper said, no, I'm not comfortable with that. I said, well, it's your firm, dude. You got to make this decision.
Right.
And I think there's a little bit, and that lawyer was able to sort of work through it and be like, yeah, you know what? It is my firm. I get to make these decisions. And so I think there's some therapy in some of the better groups.
No, look, just like the show is. I mean, yeah. Our listeners, I mean, this is, I get it, but the struggle is real. Look, you've bet on somebody, you can't live without them, and they're saying no to something. Now, look, part of the job as that manager is to how to make them embrace what you want. But there are two reasons they don't want it, right? One is a logical one, which is like, hey, this is going to screw up your business. And the other is, I'm just afraid of it because I've never used it. And it's like, as we see more and more hacking situations, I bet on, into it to protect me more than I do my IT guy.
Yeah.
And that those, it is look, lots of options in masterminds. This is a cost-effective one, which John runs it as a passion play. Right. And, good meals, good people. And a limited buy-in, which is good and bad, right? There's nice when something is continuous, but for many of us, we've made this our home. We show up all the time. It's great to see people.
I'm excited. I can't wait till you tell me, usually a week before you'll send me an email of all the people that are attending. But it's funny. I still text people that I met at that first one that I went to 11 years ago in Chicago, which seems like so long ago, but I can still close my eyes and visualize being in the room and working through the challenges I had at that time, and breaking bread with that core group. What's crazy is, Mike Leiner, who I met at that first one, I'm going to drive up to Maine in a couple of months and go fishing with my son and him and his son, because, we have that opportunity. And I'm sure sitting on the boat, he and I will talk business for, 9 hours while the boys are casting for tuna. But I think, that's one of the great things about being, in this space, is that you can make those friendships that can get you through the tougher times. You're not doing this alone. Other people may be doing it similarly and riding alongside you. And if you can tap into that network, it's a wonderful thing.
No, I couldn't agree more. And John's a special guy who's curated just a great group, and to be able to, like, lifelong friends. And some of it is I've made it like my own home, where like I brought you in, Gary Christmas, and now it's like, look, it's rare that you and I get to hang out, but if you have 24 hours to hang out with somebody at this age, when, it gives you a business reason to go and do something which reinforces these business friendships, it goes a long way.
Yeah. So folks, if you're listening and you want to go, it's the mastermindexperience.com. But definitely sign up. Come visit with Seth and I in New York on April 10th, because I think it's going to be a fun day. And like you said, the relationships that you build are going to be phenomenal.
And like I believe first time attendees, if you type in BluShark as a code, it takes $500 off. So it's down to $1,000. It's just, I mean, you can eat the food there for $1,000. It's
absolutely. I mean, a day, a night or two in New York City, that's worth it. For me, being the old man that I am, just getting away from the folks and at home and getting to, relive my glory days, hanging out in the bars of Lower Manhattan for a night, are going to be worth it for me.
Well, I got to say, before we go, there's one news story that intersects law, pop culture, and everything else, which is Afroman. I don't know if you followed this.
No, I've been following it the whole time, because, at one point we had well, I'm a rap fan to begin with. So I had heard Lemon Poundcake before it became newsworthy.
Okay, so for those not knowing, Afroman, living in Ohio, had the police raid his house, some small town, raid his house. They come in, guns drawn, they knock down his door, and they're looking for who knows what, drugs.
They were looking for drugs, and there was a claim that there was somebody he had kidnapped in the house.
Right, like pretty accentuated. And like this was like small town cops that were not the best and brightest. They dropped, no charges ever brought. They don't repair his door. They destroy his place. They cut off his security camera at one point. He then decides to monetize this incident by taking his security camera footage and turning it into these rap songs, including, which we'll hopefully get this spliced in. Tim, please take care of this. A scene of one of the officers walking through his house and basically stopping and doing a triple take on a lemon pound cake in the middle of his.
It looked like a good cake.
Put down his gun and cut him a slice. Of what? Lemon pound cake.
It looked like it was under the glass little thing. It was the whole to do. And he got sued for like $4 or $5 million collectively by a bunch of cops over defamation. And what's great in defamation, you have to take the stand to say how you've been harmed. And this, Officer Poundcake, as he's called, was saying how people started sending him pound cakes to the station, and this and that. The one defense witness they called, I believe it was Officer Poundcake's ex-wife, who was explaining how this did not really harm him in any way, and that it was the whole thing. And anyway, if you can go down this rabbit hole for hours, I hope you enjoy it. But there are a lot of interesting lessons learned, both from, the law on defamation. Mr. Aaron Mink, hopefully.
It'll be studied in law schools.
No doubt.
This is a great case. I mean, because any law school professor who's talking about this topic has to reference it.
And I think, I don't remember back to law school, and was it Crim Pro? Where I remember this professor starts just asking us, why do we arrest people? And why do we incarcerate? Like, it was each of these questions, and you start to think about it. And with each step, you're realizing that, like, there are questions we may not be so comfortable with as we go through that process. And I think what's here, we see a lot about small town cops and rap they have. When you realize how it impacts a person, this guy happens to have the vehicle to show people, but I mean, look, you do this for a living every day. The idea that, what recourse do you have?
I have a perfect example. We just had a case that was set for trial last week, and the state finally dropped it after 18 months. We had a client who was arrested there was a traffic backup, and the client pulled over after he got through the area and looked at the police officer and said, "Get out there and do your job," because the cop was sitting in his car. And our client got arrested for yelling at a cop to get out of the car and do your job. They charged him with disorderly conduct. They said that he said certain things in front of little children that was disorderly. And that turns out that wasn't on the body cam. It never happened. But we had to go all the way through and be ready for a trial.
Right, cost.
We prepped it. Client paid us for a trial
paid
prep.
You money. His life is upended.
Yeah, and we prepped for the trial, and it wasn't until the 11th hour, after 18 months, after us are saying, what did he do that was disorderly? You can talk to police officers, and you can even raise your voice at a police officer. They have a heightened level that they should be able to take, and they actually have been trained in de-escalation. And the judge and the DA were like, "You can't speak poorly to a police officer." We're like, "Do your job isn't speaking poorly. No slurs, no bad language. Just, hey, get out there. I pay your bill. I pay your salary. You get out there and do your job." And it took forever. So, it's those types of things that, like, is the intersection of the real world.
Right. Is the arrest the punishment?
Yeah.
Right? The arrest was the punishment. The arrest was the punishment.
Right. Sure.
And why is this cop deciding on who gets punished? That's the whole point of the judge. So, right. Like, there's all this stuff that happens before you get to a judge. And again, I'm not doing it justice, but when you go through and you start breaking down the elements of the criminal justice system and, bail and each of these pieces that, that are in there, like, why are we doing each of these things? And it does make you think when you start to push on this.
Yeah. Look, as somebody who's been in the criminal justice system as a defense lawyer now for 28 years, the process pretty much all the time is the punishment in and of itself. I mean, and the courts know it, the DAs know it, and they use that process to extract from a criminal defendant a pound of flesh, right, even before the case gets actually litigated. And unfortunately, the system's set up a lot of times to extract that pound of flesh to the detriment of the person who has rights, because they can't take more days off from work because they're an hourly worker, and they'll lose their job and they don't make money. Whereas the DA, if he needs to take a week off to go do something, he has paid vacation. She has paid vacation. There's an institutional bias in the system that I will rail on for the rest of my days.
Let me ask you this. I want to land the plane with this one. So there's a guy online who's always, I think it's on the Long Island, I'm not sure, who goes into different like county buildings to videotape. And immediately they start saying, "Hey, you can't videotape in here." And there's a whole what's your take on that whole process? I mean, that's being done because in one sense he's being an ass, right? But in one sense, he's almost always demonstrating what we saw with Officer Poundcake and what we've seen with this situation, which is this power hungry. We're going to set our own rules that have nothing to do with the actual rules that exist, whatever the law and constitutional rights are, that don't really exist because you can't get to the judge. And all these things, like, and people always have to make a decision. Are you going to be doing something that puts your liberty in jeopardy? Right. Because, the arrest itself is massive punishment. And I just found it interesting. If you've seen these videos, they're in my feed a lot, where they are sort of testing people on things they shouldn't be doing.
I'll be honest, I haven't seen those videos, but I think it's unfortunate that we are at a point in our society where, you know, people just trying to exercise their rights are getting, you can't come in here, you can't do that, you know, with no standing or no legal reason,
Right.
just because we don't want you to.
Right.
And that's, I mean, that's just not American. And I think, you know, part of the, like with, you know, filming police officers when you're at a protest. How many times police officers, you know, give me that phone, and they take the phone away from a person who's filming them. They have every right to film them in a public space, and you know, they don't want to be questioned. Authority doesn't like to be questioned. Authority doesn't like to be questioned at the local public school, in the local police department, at the city hall, at anywhere. Nobody likes to be questioned because they want their authority to just be recognized. And I think we need more people fighting the power. You know, bring back Chuck D and Flavor Flav, man. Fight the power. You know,
and as you know, I got to teach Flavor Flav how to search the internet while he was holding a Big Mac in circa 2000, 1990. No, this would have been 98, 99 at the New Yorker Hotel, the former Mooney Hotel on 8th Avenue.
That's awesome. That's awesome. All right, folks, that's going to do it for us this week here on the Law Firm Blueprint. Thank you so much for being with us. Of course, you can catch us anywhere you want to go on the go by subscribing to the podcast, The Law Firm Blueprint, wherever you get your podcasts. And be sure to catch us live on LinkedIn, 3 p.m. Eastern, 12 p.m. Pacific every Thursday, as well as live in our Facebook group, The Law Firm Blueprint. That's going to do it for me. I'm Jay Ruane. He is Seth Price. Thanks for being with us. Bye for now.